Welcome to Deeper Than a Disorder, where we take you into the lives of real people living with real disorders because every diagnosis has a face and a story. We're your hosts, Dr. Ashley Wiley Johnson
and Dr. George Castle.
Yeah.
It was the one thing that, could keep my mind off of thinking about autism was that I just love cars.
What about the babies?
If it's meant to happen, then it will be.
I thought that football was going to be a way out.
You can't be completely consumed in it. Let's embark on this enlightening journey together as we go
Deeper than a disorder.
Deeper than a disorder. And remember to follow us, like us, subscribe to our channel, and listen to us wherever you get your podcast. So welcome, Dallin.
Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. Let's start with your job as a filmmaker. So I know you've done other films, lots of films, and I'm sure it's something that's your passion. So could you tell us about your journey and what that's been like?
Yeah, of course. So I grew up in a really small town just outside of Yosemite in California. And I found that filmmaking was something that enabled me to grow really connected with myself, specifically in terms of my queerness. Growing up in a small town, there's not a ton of queer representation. So I'd go online and find all these films, and that led me to kind of embark into filmmaking, and specifically filmmaking that highlights people's experience and their triumphs, the difficulties they face, and how we're all just human trying to make do with what we have. So I did grad school at UC Berkeley, and now I live in New York and produce short documentaries from varying topics. I had one that came out last week on artificial intelligence in the health insurance industry.
Yes.
I've done anti-LGBTQ legislation in various different states. And of course, the one that you're talking about is dissociative identity disorder on somebody who was living with DID in Utah.
That's great. Yeah, it's amazing to be able to just have that moment and start to learn about different things. I did get a chance to check out your documentary on artificial intelligence and healthcare, at least the pieces that were put up, and you're doing great work. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So making documentaries is such a specific form. It's an art. It's a form of storytelling. All right. I myself, I'm a poet. And so I look at the world in very different eyes than most people. When I see someone, or when I see a situation that maybe people are curious for other reasons, I'm curious to really get the essence of what's going on in that moment, right? And I imagine that, there has to be a process in your head when you see things or when you experience things. Tell us about the journey and the decision to take the route of going to be a filmmaker.
Yeah, I initially thought I wanted to do photojournalism. But I think for me, such a huge part of filmmaking is the emotional process you go through with the protagonists in the film. You have to build these relationships that are often bearing their most traumatic or vulnerable parts. And stuff that they don't tell the everyday person, but they're going to tell to a camera, which then will be broadcast to thousands to hundreds of thousands of people, depending on the publication, of course. And so for me, I think that emotional connection has really made me want to be a filmmaker and has made me become a filmmaker, is because you truly do become kind of one with the person you're making a film with. And that's a very vulnerable process, because you are also then in the edit later going to show and dictate what they look like. And it might not be, our vulnerable sides of ourselves are not often the most beautiful parts of ourselves. It's difficult for us to bear that with people. Yeah. And I think that it was even shown with this film on DID, and I'm assuming we're going to talk a little bit later about it, but there were some parts of the film that have even unraveled since it's been published that aren't necessarily the most beautiful aspect of the filmmaking process. But I think it's the rawness and the vulnerability of filmmaking that makes me want to be connected with people, and makes me want to continue doing this profession, because you truly do get to share people's stories in a way that is not only impactful for them, but impactful for communities because they get to feel seen on screen.
Yes. Well, I think that is a good segue into, our next question, because you bring up such an important point that, sometimes like being able to expose the most vulnerable parts. And I think in our podcast, we've talked to so many different people. And I think about like even our last guest that was just talking about the vulnerability that you need to have to be able to conquer some of the challenges that you might face. And to do that on film and in front of somebody is just such an interesting thing. And I'm curious what made you decide to make a documentary about dissociative identity disorder.
Yeah, I think for me, it's always
Mm. Kenyon? Kenyon? Oh, I can hear you now.
Or you
okay.
you
There
you
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 go.
you just went out. Sorry. Could you repeat
So,
what you
Can you
just
hear me
said?
and I
now?
think
I'm
for
so
for
sorry.
cleanliness of the editing, you said, I think for me. So if you start from there, or would you rather lead in with us asking you the question?
No, I can go in. Yeah, and I think for me, I would change this film drastically if I were to be making it today.
Mm,
Okay.
that's
I
the
think
deep
there are
part.
things that you learn as you enter profession years into it, and especially with these disorders, which honestly kind of hate the word disorder because it
Hmm.
it
Yeah.
promotes this stigma that I don't think necessarily is cohesive towards us healing and like moving forward. It makes us feel othered, and I say disorder because I have a disorder myself.
Mm,
Um, and one of the big things that I would change around this film is, there is often with DID this idea that people are so different and othered. And I think this film really shows a distinct part of DID, which is actually, I've learned, only 5% of the population of people with DID exhibit obvious switching between identities. The other 95%, it's a very discrete disorder. And so I think if I were to make this film today, I would really switch around and change some of that stuff within the film to ensure that that was emphasized. But overall, my goal in doing a film on a disorder is just to show that these people, like, we are humans, and a lot of this stuff is really stemmed from childhood trauma, stuff we can't control. It can be from genetics, and it's really difficult to exist in a world that wants to make you feel othered for something that's very, very out of your control. And often, like, this is just a coping mechanism for survival. Like, people with DID are often just trying to survive from childhood trauma or whatever it may be that caused it. And I think it's really important to humanize those experiences, because there's nothing wrong with having DID or nothing wrong with having a disorder when you're honestly just trying to get through. And so I think the effort of doing this film was to shed light on that, and that
yes,
it's a
that
difficult
process.
disorder to wrap your head around, but
Hmm.
Yeah.
this is a human at the end of the day.
This is
Well,
a
it
human.
yeah, it's a human, and it's really interesting on that note. And I know, like, we'll talk more about some of the just everyday experiences that you observed in making this and getting to be so close into this space. But um, dissociative identity disorder, it's characterized by the presence of two or more distinct personality
Yeah.
states. Traditionally you would see multiple personality disorders and you're thinking, oh, this person's like somebody different all the time. That's what people might think. But it is a real disorder. And Dallin, you mentioned such a important piece that is unique about DID, which is it is usually kicked off by some sort of childhood
Trauma.
trauma. I know that there's some times where trauma may not be involved, as they're changing. They're seeing more cases where trauma's not involved, but usually it's that. And what happens is the person's state gets altered, and it takes control of that person's behavior. And so the identities have their own unique memories, behaviors, and kind of perceptions of the world. The disruption in identity involves the changes in their sense of self, their sense of agency, and can manifest in changes of behavior. I didn't even realize from talking to you about how it changes even in physical traits, for example. And
Yeah.
I know you could tell us about that. While rates across the sources vary, but the National Institute of Health reports that 1.5% of the world's population lives with DID. So I'm really glad to kind of go, like you said, deeper than the disorder. And I'm wondering if you want to address what Dallin's saying about the disorder and the thought, it's something that's very controversial in academia across the board. Everybody's talking about it. And just that idea that, the word disorder does kind of other people. But at the same time, for a therapist, it's a way to help us kind of classify things. So,
Mm.
um, do you think you could tell us, just like you mentioned, the Winter System, the film?
Mhm.
The Winter System was an individual that was living with DID. And what were some of the everyday things that you observed in that process of getting to see them?
Absolutely. So I think just some context that I haven't mentioned yet is, yeah, it's the film is based in Salt Lake City, Utah, and it follows the Winter System, a person who at the time was living with DID, and I believe they had
9.
alters.
Yeah, 9.
Hmm.
And these alters they're ranging from ages of like 7 years old to 20 something years old. Some of them were trans, some of them were cis. They had different wigs and like tattoos that they'd put on, different contacts. And when I mentioned that this is only 5% of the population of people living with the idea that exhibit obvious switching, this is one of the 5%. It was an extreme case of DID, I would say.
Mm.
Not
Okay.
everybody living with DID wears different wigs, and it can be very subtle. This is a disorder that's often called a discrete disorder. It's not always something that people know. It's similar with BPD. It's very discrete. You can live your life. But the
Yes.
Winter System was someone, living with this very, very, I would say, loud version of DID. And I'm so
Mm.
sorry. Can you ask your question one more time? Just so
No,
I
no,
can
you're right. You were talking about them and you said it was a loud version. And my question was like, what you said it was loud with the wigs and the physical changes. What others kind of social nuances or differences did you get a chance to observe?
absolutely. I think for this specific system, um, they were polyamorous, and so they'd had different
Mm.
partners that dated different alters. Not
Wow.
all the alters dated the same person,
Wait,
and
can
of
we
course,
pause right there? I think it's
yeah,
important for the listeners to understand that in dissociative identity disorder, alters are your personality. And there are
Right.
people that are living, there's people you can find on social media that are have talked about having 30 plus alters. So you switch your life, everything changes at that time. So you were saying, so he had they
Different.
had different alters, different
absolutely,
lovers.
yeah, and DID it's a fragmented sense of self, and of course, yeah, you have those different identities or alters that emerge. And for this case, it was very, very apparent of which alter was out. Some were more
Mm,
shy. The younger alters didn't date, of course. They were like 7 or 8 years old. But really, it's like a coping
Mhm.
mechanism to disassociate and to kind of get through your day-to-day life.
mhm.
And
Mhm.
if you think about like disassociating, that's a very common word now within our world. We
Yes.
often disassociate.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
I mean, you have DID, but I do think that that is just emblematic of this is just a larger version of disassociating
Yeah.
in
Mm,
a very visceral sense. Um, and so for them, it was really difficult to navigate work because they would come to work
right.
as one alter with maybe a neck tattoo, a temporary neck tattoo, and the next day it was not that. And their employers would often be very confused. I think they worked in an elderly home, and like that's very difficult, especially for older generations to try and understand this disorder.
Yeah.
Uh,
Wow.
and so I do think they face many complications and challenges. And my goal as a storyteller was just to emphasize that like this is not something that should be seen as abnormal. This is just somebody trying to get through the best they can with the tools they have. The Winter System, they talk about this in the film, so I'm comfortable talking about it now. Is like they were raised in the Mormon Church, had faced,
Wow.
like let me think of this, like sexual assault as a child, molestation as a child, and
Mhm.
horrible
Mhm.
circumstances,
Mhm.
horrible reality. And as an adult, they're just trying to get through. what they can. And I think a really complicated part too with DID is the prognosis and the diagnosis is very difficult. It's not something that you just snap your fingers and a doctor knows you have it. It takes a
Yes.
ton of testing and time with a practitioner. And the winter system now they don't believe they have DID anymore.
Wait, that's what I was gonna say, because to be fair, you know, at first when you filmed your film,
Mm.
they were living with DID, but there was a twist. So I feel like we have to kind of explain that part, because I don't think our listeners
Well,
know that like there was a twist here. So you did your film, the Winter System Experience Life. On that side note, before we get there, I'm just curious, with work, did they say to the employer that they had dissociative identity, or was it like, we don't know what alter would show up and you just noticed the necktie or the neck tattoo, and they weren't sure? Like, how did they manage?
I don't think it was very visceral conversations. They didn't have like, I don't think they were outwardly saying they have DID. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with disorders, is that I for one, like my bosses don't know I have BPD, and that's not something I'm ashamed of, but it's just something that I don't want to be seen as lesser by employers
Yes.
because of a disorder that again I have no control over, and I'm working very hard as an adult to like heal that.
Mhm.
So I think for them similarly, it wasn't something that was outwardly said, and maybe it was seen and explained over time. But I
Yes.
do think it's difficult for people to navigate day-to-day life with disorders because of the stigmas that arise when people think you're lesser for having one.
Yes.
So how did you film this? Take us through the film production. What was it like? How did you do it? How did you capture this? Because this sounds very intricate and very nuanced, right? How did you go about doing that?
Mm.
Yeah, so often my films are just myself, one-man band. I was working for this company called Brute at the time.
Mhm.
So I just flew to Salt Lake City with my camera and sound equipment and set up the camera and run my interviews. And then beforehand, you always do a little bit of production in terms of wondering what we would capture scene-wise. Like I definitely wanted to capture them with their partners, so doing some different activities that they do. And then just also some mundane, like day-to-day, whether it's, them switching between alters, and the different physiological and physical appearance changes that happen with that. So there's
Hmm.
a lot of just capturing and spending time and days with the winter system. And
Were
I
you
think that's the
given the
important
heads
part.
up? Like,
Oh,
when the alter would
Right.
change?
That's what I was gonna ask. Like,
Mm.
do they volitionally switch their alters,
Like
or is
voluntarily,
it
like
is it
automatic?
yeah,
Mm.
is it like they do it of their own free will? They just, oh, I want to switch my alter,
Did you have a
or
heads
do the
up?
alters just appear?
Yes.
they just appear. There were moments where they would try and get a certain alter to come out, like they wanted one of the younger alters to come out, so they put on the wig and the makeup, but he just
Mm.
wasn't coming out.
Okay.
So it's not voluntary; it just happens. And I think it was like once a day, maybe once every other day, and they would switch the wig. Not all of them had wig switches.
Okay.
Uh, yeah.
That's interesting. So on that note, now, so privately, what I'm hearing is, like, when it came to the employers, at least from your observation during your filmmaker period, you didn't see them say to their employers or individuals, like, I'm living with DID. However, when the film came out, what happened?
Yeah, so the film came out and it did really well on social media and YouTube. Um, There is, and something I want to be really careful of in this interview and just in general of talking with people with DID, is there is this notion that people with DID, or the false notion, I will say,
Mm.
that people with DID or living with DID are just attention seeking, that they fake this disorder.
Mm.
And I do think in the case of the winter system, I don't think that they knew they were faking. I don't think that they were faking at all. I
Not at
think they were
all.
diagnosed for a year by medical professionals.
When
They
you say
have
they were
exhibited
faking,
many of
I
the
don't think the listeners know what you mean. So I think maybe give them insight to, like, what actually happened,
yeah.
so that they know, because I understand what you're saying, and know that, like, we want to be sensitive. We understand. So, like,
Right.
and actually, even in talking to a psychologist, which later in the episode you'll hear, we talked about the idea that this actually is a common thing
Mhm.
because it is trauma based. So diagnoses can, but I don't want to say it, but tell what happened because I really did find it fascinating.
Yeah, so the film came out. The context is the film came out. There were already a lot of comments on the film wondering if this person was faking,
Mm,
and I just kind of brushed those off. And then a year later, the Winter System came out with a video that they no longer have DID or that they're misdiagnosed. In no way do I think their actions were malicious. They were intentionally trying to mislead audiences because they also had garnered a pretty large TikTok following
mm,
around their DID diagnosis and just the day-to-day experiences of living with DID.
mhm,
And so they no longer live with DID. But I think that was a very valid experience that they had had. I think they truly believed they had it, and in no way were trying to be malicious and allowing me to make a film or building this audience around DID. But I do think, as I've said, there is this misconception that people with DID are faking.
mhm.
And it's a stigma, or it is a diagnosis riddled with stigma and people who are often just trying to poke uh, like
Poke at it.
falsehoods. Yeah,
Yeah.
falsehoods within the diagnosis because people don't understand it. And so that has made this filmmaking process really complicated where as a journalist, your job and your role is to share truth
Mm,
and honesty and to ensure that your pieces are fact checked. But
yes.
when reporting on disorders, you never know what's going to come up. And reporting on people, you just never know what's going to come up in terms of a diagnosis, whether it is a mental disorder, whether it's a physical disorder. Um, it's really difficult to know what's going to happen. I don't think that necessarily takes away from the fact that at this point in time, this was a real person's experience.
Yeah.
This is what they believed and what they had to believe in order to get through their days. And that's just, it wasn't an easy reality for them to be living in. And I have a lot of empathy for the experience that they had.
Well, you speak to such a good point because it's like, this is your job, but it takes like a certain special type of person to do a job, especially as you're interacting with mental health challenges or behavioral health challenges. And so I'm just glad that you are one of those people that has that level of compassion because like saw some of those comments and people are like, I mean, they stormed the film
Mhm.
and said right, and I was like, and like, cool, whoa, and like, and I yeah, I mean, so I can only imagine like how that would feel, but your strength and your integrity and there was one episode where a couple I think said that you know individuals everybody's going to have a problem with you whether and that's the thing we see with dissociative identity like when the disorder before the winter system shared this personal information about the change of diagnosis people were still saying like oh I think this person could be faking right
Mhm.
in that first year and they didn't even know about the change it's truly unique to say the very least.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I was wondering if there was anything that you'd want people to know about not only DID, but other, you mentioned the fact about, your condition. Is there anything you would want people to know um,
Besides what you shared, which
besides
was
besides what you already shared?
now, and we still have more to talk about another piece. But if there's anything that takeaway that you have from being there and kind of being a part of that,
Yeah, absolutely. I'm feeling more comfortable talking about BPDs. So if that's something that we'd want to dive into, we can.
okay,
Sure.
good, good. We wanted to be respectful of it, obviously.
I
Right.
appreciate that. Yeah.
Right.
I don't know if there's necessarily anything more around this. I just think that people should really try and humanize others a little bit more when they can,
Yeah.
um, and just not always assume the worst intentions in people who are clearly really
Yes,
struggling.
that part. And so I think when I think of the question again about you being a filmmaker and mentioning just the special component, I was trying to be respectful and respect your privacy, but I'm sure now with you saying that you're okay with us sharing it, that you as a person who is living and thriving yourself with BPD, which is considered a mental health challenge, tell us about like what piece, of you right now that just really like fueled you to just jump into this experience and anything you want to share about your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's maybe what has drawn me into this film and just into trying to be more empathetic of this person's experience, more empathetic of this person's experience. Is yeah, so 6 months ago I was diagnosed with BPD, and that's been it's just made me empathize a lot with this experience of having a disorder and the stigma that can come around having a disorder, which is something you cannot control, as I've said before.
And for and just to let listeners know, BPD refers to bipolar disorder.
No.
Or
Borderline personality
Borderline
excuse me,
personality.
borderline, excuse me.
I thought bipolar too.
Borderline personality disorder,
Yeah.
correct, right.
Yeah.
So yeah, just explaining to people what that actually is, before we get into.
Yeah, so borderline personality disorder is a disorder in DSM-5, and there are essentially 9 criteria. You have to meet 5 of them to be diagnosed with BPD.
Okay.
The 9 criteria range from frantic efforts to avoid abandonment, unstable and intense relationships, distorted self-image, impulsivity, recurrent suicidal behavior or self-harm, affective instability, chronic feelings of emptiness, inappropriate anger, or just anger in general,
Wow.
and transient stress-related paranoia or disassociation. Just
Okay.
reading from my notes here.
Yeah. Okay. I was like, wow, you like
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
I was like, you're like, but I mean, you're living a story, so I can imagine that you know what we're dealing with. I mean, at least most times with these challenges, diagnoses, I'm like, when I thought I had something in a doctor, I could tell you the textbook definition. So yeah, thank you
Absolutely.
for sharing.
Yeah, and I think that I'm a very solutions-focused person. I like to have things understood. And what's so difficult with disorders is it's not something you're going to understand fully, and it's not something that you have control over at all. I think for me, I didn't understand. I have a disorder. I'm 27 now. At 26, I learned, which I guess is still relatively young in terms of doing this work. But disorders take shape and face in various different forms. I'm really lucky that for me, on a professional sense, I haven't felt anything in terms of my disorder, except in terms of like people living with BPD, we often struggle with thought patterns. That's why CBT is such a big part of our work, because cognitive behavioral therapy, because we're changing our thought patterns. And sometimes I've noticed there's this thing people with BPD can do. It's called splitting. It's kind of like it's really interesting because DID and BPD do have a lot of
that's what I was saying.
Similarities.
Yeah.
Symptoms. They aren't the same. A lot of people think they are. But people with BPD do this thing called like all or nothing thinking, and it's like often called devaluing or valuing something. And that's the only time in work that I'll feel that it comes out, is like I'll really devalue a piece of work I'm doing, or I'll really value something or someone. But really the areas where BPD I've struggled with is like my personal life and relationships. And as somebody who spends my world telling the stories of others, learning the lived experiences and empathizing with others, when I come home, I want to like have a nice lived experience too. I want to feel loved and cared for. And so often I've felt my relationships struggle. And so that's where BPD, I think, has come in. It's this interesting thing where you're struggling because you have a diagnosis that carries a lot of stigma, carries a lot of weight, but also a lot of relief to have something to work towards. BPD is not forever. You can really alleviate a lot of the symptoms. You can get out of the 5 criteria that you're required to out of the 9, and no longer be diagnosed with BPD. Doesn't mean it goes away forever, that you're just going to have like this normal atypical brain. But yeah, I think that's been kind of my experience navigating it.
So Dallin, this has been like an unbelievable conversation.
Absolutely.
Right? Don't you think?
No, it's enlightening. I think a lot of people do not understand, people living with BPD, people living with DID. And so it's really important to actually get to speak to you, someone who's done the filmmaking, but also had the lived experience of having BPD, And, I think the more that we get to sit down and speak to someone or understand just what their day to day is, the less we're afraid of them. The less we're likely to have hostility towards them. We fear what we don't understand, and so when we learn about people, we learn about their life. We can oftentimes see ourselves in them. We can oftentimes see things that we also struggle with. I mean, some of the things that you said, I think, are common amongst a lot of people, right? Everybody wants to come home and feel like they're enjoying their life. They want love. They want to build relationships. They want to experience a lot of the things that you were talking about. And so there's obviously some commonality amongst all of us. And so I think one of the things that I took away is that, BPD and DID share some similarities, but also the similarities are not just amongst people who are living with BPD or DID. It's all of us. It's all of us. And we just want a better life.
I'm kind of curious, out of curiosity, just as I'm thinking about it. Last thought that I have is like, do you think that doing this film and like having this moment with the winter system, did you think it helped to enlighten you at all when it came to your own journey of coming to your own diagnoses?
I think thereafter it's helped me shed some of the shame in terms of having a diagnosis. And even today, like I was experiencing the shame of talking about BPD on this podcast, of not knowing who will see this or listen to this. And but I think the most important part, and reflecting back on this film now and doing this podcast, it's made me reflect a lot more on that experience. It's just the fact that like so much of this is just out of our control.
Yes.
Yeah.
We can't judge ourselves for the things that are fully out of our control. We can only control, the things we can. I can't control the factors in my childhood that contributed to my BPD. I can't control the genetics that also go into a BPD diagnosis, just as the winter system cannot control some of the stuff that they experienced in their childhood. And so I think in the reflection process, kind of post-mortem, after all this is done and the film is out, now there's been like, it's been talked about online. It's just the fact that there's just so much that we cannot control, and we can only move forward with the factors that we can. And for me, it's like working hard in therapy, having a psychiatrist, reading literature. With the winter system, I wish them the best, and I think for them it's whatever healing journey that they think is going to impact them. So I think in that essence, it's made me kind of humanize myself a little bit more in this experience, and
Absolutely.
others living with disorders.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when I think about it, everybody, no matter who you are, has life happen to them, right? Things that we cannot control, situations that we don't necessarily put ourselves in. Life just happens.
Absolutely.
And it's less about what happens and more about, well, where do we go from here?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right? Doing something about it, putting one foot in front of the other, and living life. And and there's going to be twists and turns, but it's about what you do with it, right? It's the journey
that counts.
And this is a journey that counts.
The journey that counts.
And we're all on the journey. We're all on a journey.
Yeah, we're on a journey.
We're all on a journey.
I'm glad we're on this journey, George.
We're all on this journey.
Okay, Dallin, tell us now, what is next for you? I know you have a new film. How can we support you in this process? And just tell us what's next.
Yeah, I'm just going to continue making films. Going to the difficult thing I will say with BPD is you never know if it's your BPD speaking or like your perfectionism. So who knows? Maybe I'm going to law school, or maybe I should just actually be okay with the career I have right now. You never know like what's speaking in terms of where to go next. But yeah, I think just the best way to support is to, not necessarily for me, but for people living with the ID, is just to do research and to understand the stigmas around this and how media can perpetuate those stigmas. I honestly think my piece perpetuated a little bit of a stigma for DID. And so just continue to educate myself and others in terms of these disorders.
Yeah.
Well, Dallin, we just want to thank you so much for going deeper than a disorder with us. We really value the time. We wish you best of luck for the things that are moving forward.
Absolutely.
And you've made this an awesome podcast episode.
Absolutely. And thank you for encouraging us to evolve, because really that's what it's about, right? You might go to law school, you might not, right? It's it's evolution. We just embrace the evolution. When life happens, we embrace the evolution, and we're better for it. And so absolutely, we have gone deeper than a disorder. Thank you so much for joining
That
us.
sounded good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dallin. Take care.
Take care, Dallin.
Please call me when you come to Los Angeles. I need
Oh,
to
we need a
meet
coffee.
you.
Bye.
Yes, like we need a
Yes.
coffee for sure. They're in New
Maybe something a
York.
little stronger. I don't know.
Okay, well that I'm gonna save that when I come to New York or even in Los
Yes.
Angeles. Either way
Yeah.
it goes. I could do anywhere.
Yeah.
We're going for a nightcap. Take care.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Take
thank
care.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.